Thank you, Zeb. I've got some little notes which I might need to refer to because normally I use slides as a way of directing me to the next thing I'm going to say. So if I have to keep on going back here, it's because I need to figure out what I was going to say next. I turned 61 last year. This is the absolute last place in the world I expected to be at the age of 61 because I thought I was going to be retired. I'd probably be sitting on a beach somewhere with a book and, you know, just whiling away my retirement, and that would be how it went. But that just wasn't to be. So in 2012, my husband Adrian and I bought a farm. It's about 750 hectares. It's between Cromwell and Wanaka. Our boundary is on the lake, and we go up into the foothills of the Pisa Range. And really, we have absolutely no place in farming. We have no experience, we have no training, and we absolutely have no aptitude. So we bought this farm, and we kind of visit once in every while, every 3 months or something. People show us things which you've got no idea about. I mean, we don't even garden. We have a gardener at home. We don't know anything about plants or anything like that. And 6 years goes by, and in 2018, a number of events conspired, and we decided we either need to sell it or we needed to farm it very differently. And so Adrian, who doesn't like farms and just wants to play golf, said that we should sell it. And I said, well, I just feel a big failure if I sell it, so maybe we'll just start farming it. And so that's what we started to do. So we have a farm manager, and we had lots of advisors in the past, and we just don't have any of that anymore. And instead, I thought I could do it, because like, it just can't be that bloody difficult. Anyway, it turned out that it is actually quite challenging. And for me, though, at that moment, I'd started, my farming education started when I began reading the Countrywide magazine. Now, after about 3 or 4 years, I realised that Countrywide magazine was like the Hello magazine for farmers. So I was really getting nothing from that at all. But it did enable me to lift the bonnet on a few concepts and stuff I hadn't really known about. So when I began thinking about how I was going to farm it differently, I went through a spiritual phase where I stood at the bottom of the hill and asked the hill what it thought I should do. And of course, the hill just didn't answer, because hills don't answer, so that was useless. So I then started thinking about what conventional farming looked like, and we were a fully conventional farm. So I kind of could go back through the books and see what we'd been doing. And then I got very attracted by maybe switching to organics. But the more I read about that, the more I felt that organics was a methodology for finding a substitute method for the conventional system. And because we have vineyards, and I'd started to look into what vine health looked like, I just felt that maybe organics wasn't for me, and I needed to explore what might lie beyond organics. What would have happened if we hadn't had organics? What would we have thought about? Maybe we'd have thought about a return to more of an investment in nature, but what would that investment look like? And I didn't really have any idea. So there are two things that we started doing on our farm. The first thing that we did was, I suppose, pretty common to all farms that go through some kind of a regenerative process. So we put different and diverse seeds in the ground, and we grow cover crops, and some of them look really pretty. And then we incorporate grazing ruminants in that system. And there's absolutely nothing I can say that's of any use to anybody about that, because I know nothing about it. So livestock and me don't get on. I have moved the stock about 6 times, and it's always ended in a lot of tears. The electric fencing is just in a big mass on the ground, which takes me hours to try and figure out. The only time I ever move stock is by accident, when I leave a gate open. And I do that quite a bit because I just have the idea that you can open the gate, and if I quickly go in and do something, I'll get out before the stock come out. And invariably that just doesn't work, because as soon as I open the gate, the stock come out the gate, and now I'm in a world of pain. So I don't do anything about that. But what I did start looking at was microbes. And around about 2020, when COVID was happening, the Soil Food Web school in the US began to put all their training online because nobody could go there anymore. And so that was quite good for me, and that's when I began that journey, and I'm still in it. 4 years later, I'm still bloody cracking away at it. So when we think about what a soil ecosystem might look like, so we have a lot of there's a lot of discussion about the soil and about soil health. So from a what is in your soil, you've got sand, silt and clay, you've got organic matter, which is just dead and dying things, and then you've got biology. So when we think about what is that biology, well, you've got things that you can see, which is good, and it's good that we can see them because then we can kind of think about them. So we've got worms and spiders and other bugs, none of which I really enjoy very much, but it's good that they're there. And then we've got larger microbes, or we've got microarthropods, and we've got larger microbes, which are things like nematodes and protozoa. And then we've got fungi, of course, and we've got bacteria. So when I started digging up my soil, what I found was that I had a lot of bacteria. Well, I say a lot, but probably not that much, but I didn't have much else. And that's in all likelihood because over many, many years, conventional farms have literally destroyed whatever soil ecosystem was there. And so the first thing that happens is these kind of microbes go dormant, and that's fine, but then eventually they actually go altogether. So we started playing around with, well, could we get them back by using regenerative methods, and specifically thinking about seed diversity, plant diversity, and grazing ruminants? And my conclusion to that is not really. Not really. And those things do add something, and they're very valuable, but because on my journey I'm trying to think about what a restored ecosystem, soil ecosystem would look like, I feel I can't stop there. So what I started to think about was, how could I breed microbes? So what I use is a compost to breed microbes. I use that because I'm not interested in any particular microbe. So you can go to the store and buy microbes in either freeze-dried or in a liquid. And typically, I think those things may well be 1 or 2 microbes, but actually what we really probably need is a huge diversity of microbes. So we want to think about how we're going to breed that diversity. So what we did was we started making compost. I make the compost using ingredients from our farm. And I'm doing that for 2 reasons. The first reason is that we've got a lot of waste products, so we want to use that waste product. And for us, our biggest 2 wastes are crack willows, which we have a lot of. In fact, if there was any money in crack willows, I'd make a fortune. And horse manure. This is how I explain to my husband why these horses are on the farm, because I need their manure. And then for our green material, we mow our diverse perennial pasture. We put that all in. We use a thermophilic process. That's because we don't really want any pathogens. We need to monitor it because we don't want it to be anaerobic. We want it to be aerobic. And then we let that mature. And then we've been thinking about, well, okay, now how am I going to get that onto the land? Now, if you're managing quite a small area, like a garden, you can literally apply it to your soil. And that works super well. But in my scale, that's probably not going to work because I've got 750 hectares. And I'm not really interested in the particulate material that comprises the compost. I'm actually only interested in the microbes. So what we have been playing around with is how we spin the microbes off that compost into water solution, and then from that apply that to the soil. And so what we've done is we have applied that as a soil drench. So that's where we might put it out through a toe invert or a pivot potentially. Or we apply it under the soil. So we'd use a keyline plough with a tank on the top and drippers to apply those microbes underneath the soil surface. Or we apply it to the plant surface. So we've used that in a vineyard to apply those microbes to the plants. Now it can be, and I don't think this is a task for the faint-hearted. And so I feel that microbes are just so important to our future, that our soils don't have the right kind of microbes in them. They've got some bacteria, but that's it. That's going to get us a wee way, but not very far. But don't get me wrong, because bacteria are good. If all you've got is bacteria, well, that's a good thing. It's just that you're probably going to help that soil along. It's not going to be self-sustaining because it's going to need more than that to be able to kind of, if you like, mine what's in the soil and produce its own circular life cycles. So we're persisting with trying to apply all of these microbes to our soils. And what we notice is that our bacterial populations rise, but so far the other microbes, we don't see statistically significant increases in our microbial populations. So we have begun to think more about investing in infrastructure that allows us to scale up our production, but also to think about how we can test concentrations of microbes to make sure what we're putting out is doing enough to inoculate the soil, and that everything we're doing is inoculating that soil. So we're not a finished not in a finished state. This year we'll trial a much smaller plot to see what we can do with much smaller plots. We know when we look at our gardens that they're all there. It's just when we take it out into a pasture setting that we don't see enormous success. Having said that, I think we see enough success to think that we should continue, because we don't apply any synthetic fertiliser to our farm. What that means is that we don't have a bill for fertiliser, and nor do we have a bill for applying it. We don't turn the soil, and we don't do winter crops. And all of that means that our bottom line benefits from reduction in cost, and we downscale the number of stock that we have, but we're able to grow them better and finish them better. And that means that overall our financial picture is a lot better than it used to be when we were fully conventional. But if I say that to conventional farmers, they usually don't believe me. They should believe me, because I actually started out life as a chartered accountant. So you'd like to think I do know how the numbers work. But farm accounting is a very complex area, so I can understand how that is really very, very difficult for people. So look, the last thing I was going to say before I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you might have is if I was having my time over and thinking again about how I approached that challenge, I'd have probably started with compaction, because the soils on my farm were completely compacted. And in the beginning, we employed a lot of methods that seem, fashionable might not be the right word, but seem to us to be very common and other people were having great success with. And we just had absolutely no success at all. And that's probably because if you've got compacted soils, you almost can't do anything. You've got no oxygen in your soil, and that's the thing that life needs. All life needs oxygen. So we sometimes think that water is a limiting factor, but it's not a limiting factor. Most part, it's oxygen. So I'd have started with compaction, and I'd have then thought about minerals. Because if your farm is short of particular minerals that are crucial for plants, then you're going to have a real struggle in actually getting your plants to be healthy enough for your livestock, if that's what you're using, and that's what we're using, because we're growing biomass for livestock, to finish properly. And if they don't finish properly, then the economics of the whole thing starts to collapse on you, and that's very sad. And then you'll get stories that we sometimes hear about where people have embarked on a new program and it hasn't worked for them. And that lets sort of everything down. And then after that, I'd be thinking about kind of microbes and other ideas and grazing ruminants and all those kinds of things, which are very complex and interesting. But, without those two basics, I think there's, a bit of a challenge. So that's how I would have, that's what I'd tell myself if I was starting over. So anyway, that's what I was sort of going to say to you to sort of open up. I'm happy to go into any more details if anybody's got any detailed questions. Of course, I might not know the answer. Don't ask me anything about cows or sheep.
How did you address compaction?
So we addressed compaction by time. That's what we did. But actually, I think too much time was wasted. We should have done a one-time soil disturbance and fixed it that way. So in the beginning, so in 2018, we went round the farm and our grasses were like carpet. So there was a small amount of above ground biomass. There was a 1 centimetre root density over, and then there was nothing. And the roots went down and along. So now we have rooting depths at, probably upwards of 6 to maybe 8 inches. But that's obviously taken about 5 years. And I just feel we could have done that. We could have done a better job of that.
But how did you achieve that? Like, what was the change in management that allowed?
Just time. So don't graze, no continuous grazing. So periodic grazing, intermittent watering to actually let those plants get a bit water and heat stressed. Just let that happen and just live with that and break that down. So what we were doing before, because we were constantly in a pasture renewal system and we had winter crops as a consequence of that, if you think about what happens in a winter crop, or it could be a summer crop as well, you're grazing that quite intensively. You've got all those animals standing around in quite a small area. So, that all looks great, but you come out of that and your soils sort of dry out a bit. And now you've got, 10 hectares of concrete and not much is going to grow in that other than thistles or fat hen. Fat hen loves to grow where I am. And so that's what we were kind of getting. Yeah. Does that answer you? Hello.
I have a question just in regards. Do you have any sort of like monitoring techniques that you're adopted to keep an check on everything?
So what we obviously use microscopy for our soils. So we dig them up and then I look at them under a microscope. And I do use something called a microbiometer, which is a little saying that little test, and it's got an app on your phone, and it's probably sort of half pie reliable, but I do use it because if I've got students, I find it's a lot easier and quicker to show them. And that is giving you some kind of indicator of your biomass, of your microbial quantity in your soils. We have a series of tests that we run every 3 months. So that is about examining how far we can get a penetrometer into the ground at 150 psi. We look at water infiltration. We look at worm counts and lots of other things like that. And then we use weight gain in cattle to give us a kind of, obviously that's a long way out. So we've now discovered something we did really wrong last year. We've only discovered it now, which is a bit sad, but anyway. So it's not really very good, very reliable, as it's not a leading indicator. Usually what I find is a bacterial count in the spring gives me a really good idea about what's going to happen in the late spring, summer. And then we use bricks to measure the quality of our pasture, which is shit, so didn't say that. So our next thing that we came to minerals late. We should have come to minerals first. But so now we're doing foliar spraying of minerals.
Can you just say a bit more about your keyline plough? Like, where did it come from?
So a keyline plough comes from Australia, and it's basically a number of tines, and it opens the soil up and then closes it again afterwards. So what we did behind each tine is we had a tank constructed with little pipes that drip the microbes down to the base of the tine. So if we decide to put that tine in at 6 inches, we're then dripping that microbiology in at 6 inches. And that's because one of the things you'll hear about in terms of microbes is that if you apply those microbes to your soil, UV light will kill them very quickly. And so the idea is you've got to get them underneath the soil. Now, I don't know that that's actually true, but in order to humour that perspective, I decided I'd get a keyline plough and I'd give it a go. And I'm not sure that is a very, if you think about the diesel you've got to use to get that out, I think I'd be better off to use the electricity and put it out as a soil drench under a pivot. So yeah, we're still using that keyline plough to test what we think happens, or what we find is that sometimes we'll keyline plough an area, half a paddock, and then go back and take a look at what it's delivering. And I mean, I can't tell the difference. Sometimes you see what you want to see. So I'm not sure the keyline plough will be part of our final toolkit.
Is it helping with compaction?
I think it would help with, you'd think it would help with compaction, but because we don't have as much compaction as we used to have, now we don't really see a huge benefit in that. Like if you keyline anything, you'll find you will get a plant response from that, but we don't find we get that much of a plant response.
Did you keyline plough on the contours, or did you just...
No, our land is quite flat, and we're mainly addressing areas under pivot. So, but yes, you can use it.
And what was it that drove you in the direction of feeling that, generating the microbes elsewhere and then applying them rather than just trying to create the conditions for them to,
Okay.
emerge?
Okay.
Like, I don't quite understand the sort of...
Yeah, how they get there.
Well, no, not so much how they get there, but, if you sort of accept that there's, blowing around all over the place and you get microbes settling in different locations. And
Yes.
You can expect over time, you're just trying to speed that process.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's all you're trying to do, because so so on my farm, I would say it's been really religiously conventionally farmed. So when I look at my soils under a microscope, there's bacteria and nothing else. In fact, one day I did find a nematode, and I was really excited about that. Unfortunately, it was a root-feeding nematode. Just the one type you really don't want.
But what you do with the compost is just find more bacteria, and you're saying the other.
So the bizarre thing is that by using compost, I can actually breed microbes that are not present currently in my soil at numbers that are going to actually repopulate that area. That is, so I guess what I'm trying to do is to re-inoculate that soil.
So to monitor that, like, can you look at the soil under a microscope
Yes.
putting on, and then a week or so after you applied it and see a change?
Yes.
Right.
And so, but the change you often see is, I think, more bacteria, because at the rates that I'm applying it, it's still not enough to chip into seeing it present all the time. I can do it when I look in my gardens, but that, what I'm talking about is farming at a kind of a scale. And so, I'm trying to restore that environment, I think, in a very small area where gardeners can tend a garden, and they spend a lot of time looking at that and applying compost or teas or extracts to it, and they can generate that. It's just that when you start to look at 1 hectare or 10 or 100 hectares, now you're in a different scale. I can't mix compost in a 20-litre bucket. Right, there's just not going to be.
Are you seeing like a big increase in the organic matter content?
Yes.
Over time.
Yep.
Actually...
So what we in terms of our organic matter, so our organic matter has gone from about 3-4% to about 7-8%. So,
that's again creating the conditions.
That's right. So hopefully, I think if I'd started on day one by applying compost here, I'd have got nowhere, because I need the home. So I need all of those things to come in at the same time.
But then when you're applying just like a liquid bacterial suspension that like you described, like, have you considered, like, almost like an inoculation from another place in the local area that's got better quality soil, bringing in some of the bugs and stuff that you're hoping will again kind of try and speed the process?
We've done that a little bit with tree planting, because we want to grow kowhais. There are no kowhais left on our farm. It would have been covered in kowhais. So we've gone out and taken the soil from where we know the kowhais were to bring it back to try to inoculate that. But it's hard to find really good soil ecosystems. It's really hard to find them, in our farming systems.
Maybe talk some of your thoughts around being a chartered accountant and stepping into regenerative agriculture.
And the lack of certainty and all of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah. Well, what is there to say about that? Well, accounting is a branch of economics, and I used to work at the Treasury, and at the Treasury is run by economists. Now, the thing about economists is that they're never accountable for anything that happens. You never find an economist that's going to tell you something, and then when it doesn't work out, kind of puts up their hand and says, I'm sorry. That's just not the world in which they live. Accounting is more about, is the measurement of economics. So the good thing that accounting brings to the table is a sense that we do need to try to find indicators that we can measure, to just give us some sense. Can't be the only thing. There's got to be a broad range of things. but some sense about where you are going. Because when we rely on our eyes, really quite bad things happen. It seems to me that, you know, we would apply something to our soil in the beginning and somebody would come along and say, can you see the difference? It's fantastic. I'm like, I can't see a bloody thing. I don't know what you're talking about. You know, we really do need to try to find ways of measuring things. When I think about what economics has done, what economics broadly has done across the world is driven people to the conventional system that we've got. Usually at this point in the presentation, I've got some slides that I put up around the use of fossil fuels in the world. So we start at about the end of World War II. We haven't been really using that much in the way of fossil fuels, and then it just goes exponentially up. Okay, and interestingly, when you map that slide against the slide of nitrogen use, it's exactly the same. And if you map those two slides against the trajectory for GDP growth, it's exactly the same. So one conclusion, maybe it's not the correct one, is that actually a lot of where we are in the world today is because of nitrogen use and fossil fuels. And when you look at that, it's really hard to see how policymakers or governments could possibly consider getting off that gravy train. If you're a government and you're in charge of a population of people, you have to be able to feed them. I don't just mean feed them food. You have to generate income in order to do that. And fossil fuels, one way or the other, and nitrogen use have been the main predominant way that we've done that. So thinking about stepping off that into a different world is quite frightening. And I think it's very important, but I think it's also, we've just got to be realistic. Governments are probably not going to spin around at any point in the very near future and start signalling methodologies or policies that might incentivize a different way of perhaps farming. They're unlikely to do that. So it's going to be down to individuals like us to bloody do something. I don't think that answered your question, sorry.
That's perfect. That's an amazing segue for our next segment, I think.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Amanda.
thank you.